Right. Next on deck, Chandran Nair is the founder and CEO of Global Institute for Tomorrow, and he's also chairman of Advantage Ventures, and we're very fortunate to have him around the desk with me here at the SGX. Chandran, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So this is an interesting concept, sort of wean ourselves off the developed world model of pure capitalism, and of course, through that process, we've seen things fall through the cracks. How can social investing sort of pave over those cracks and deliver the win-win, outcome for both sides?
Well, I mean, the main concept behind social investing is to essentially invest initially in the social gains that are to be realized through investing, and then at the same time bring acceptable financial gains to the investors.
Okay.
And in that sense, it's a departure from the pure, if I use your words, capitalist way, which is to essentially maximize the financial gains, and on the periphery talk about social impact and CSR and stuff like that.
Okay.
So that's the short answer to a more complex.
But how do you reach that balance in achieving the two?
Well, fundamentally, it cannot take place within the context of the way we currently look at investments. We cannot do that in the context of the current architecture of how first world asset management practices are carried out. There's too many imperfections or market distortions within that, which we all know have resulted in various crises. So you have to have a new architecture. I've written a concept paper on this that will require essentially, it needs central banks and governments to intervene. It needs mandates from the state. And certainly it requires investors who would understand that 20% return on net is not a law of physics.
Right.
It's essentially a distortion and social manipulation. You externalize social environmental impacts, etc., which is of course being borne out at the moment in our environment. The haze is a classic example of the externalization of true costs. It's not an environmental disaster, it's an economic disaster born out of misplaced understanding of how you invest.
And talking about the need for state intervention in this process, from your experience, have you seen anywhere around the globe where they have been more open and willing to approach this?
I mean, there are pockets of attempts to do this, and particularly in the UK, in the US. But I would say that those examples are not applicable here. I mean, those are essentially advanced economies attempting to bring about some sort of social impact in sort of post-industrial societies. We're here at a development stage, and my argument is that we need the sovereign funds, the central banks, etc., to look at essentially if the basic purpose of economic development here and spreading prosperity is to meet basic needs. And let's be very clear. Sitting in Singapore, we might forget that, but the majority of people in this part of the world don't have access to the basic needs, and I can go from everything from water and sanitation and toilets to basic housing. Then it requires a very different way that the state will intervene to set the conditions for money to be leveraged in that way. For too long, and my argument is the instruments used in the West do not apply here because we are still having an economic model premised on foreign direct investment and trickle down.
But aren't we seeing that sort of incubated here in Southeast Asia through some of the private-public partnership projects that have been unfolded in some areas like infrastructure?
I mean, public-private partnerships are an attempt to bring public and private interests together, but they're not the same as social impact investments. I mean, they are important, and I don't want to downplay them. But the case of social impact, I'll just give you one example, for instance. Let's just look at rice production today in Asia. As the population of Asia rises to maybe 5-6 billion in 2050, we're going to need a lot of food. Today, most of our rice production is now being carried out almost on an industrial scale. These have huge externalities to do with essentially the excessive use of pesticides, chemicals, etc. I am not talking about a world in which we'll have organic rice. That is utopian as well. But there's a whole medium in which we can start to regenerate sort of farming in communities to grow rice without being sort of utopian, by creating investment structures in food production that will essentially bring both prosperity and take away from this impoverishment of the countryside, create prosperity, the farmers get a better price, and at the same time, those who invest in them create value over the long term.
And Chandran, are there enough sort of platforms out there that investors can take advantage of social investing to meet these twin goal needs? And I'm just curious, in terms of the audience out there, who's that most acknowledged and appreciated by? Is it by the developed world, or is it by investors sort of closer to home here in Southeast Asia?
I mean, sadly, there are not very many platforms, and that's what I'm calling for. I'm calling for the region, essentially the governments, etc., to create those platforms. These are not platforms that, in my view, on the scale needed, that can be created by investors. Investors need those platforms, Bill, which I think is what you're alluding to. Yes. Governments need to set them up. And the problem is that most of our governments still think that they run the economies based on what the Fed says, etc. We need to focus on development. So they need to create this platform, create the incentives for investors. Investors who will come in will need to recognize this is not a get-rich scheme. This is long-term viability. But in the long term, they will create great value, and they will contribute to their societies as well. So, you know, the people who are listening to this are essentially still a fringe minority of investors in the region. Everyone's talking about this. There's a multitude of conferences. But when push comes to shove, I have seen very few who are willing to sign on the dotted line.
I'm quite confused that we haven't seen more adoption of this when you look at the philanthropy around the world, particularly out of the United States, with, you know, titans in entrepreneurs are willing to throw billions of their, you know, of their fortunes behind social needs, and yet, you know, this sounds like a perfect win-win situation for this sort of investing.
Well, you know, without sounding anti-philanthropy, philanthropy is a whole different ballgame, and there's much confusion about philanthropy, and I think philanthropy, in a way, does a disservice to this whole society of social investing. So flooding the sort of the do-good causes with philanthropic money, I don't think allows us to build these sorts of more social investment type of platforms, because it sort of allows people to abdicate responsibilities. In our part of the world, we think someone rich from the Western world is going to write a check, or some rich Western government is going to come and donate money. That world is over. And so philanthropy, whilst important in emergencies, is not really the basis for building the social impact sort of economy for the future. And we need to wean ourselves away from this, you know, the rich guys are going to write a check.
We need a whole new architecture.
And this part of the world needs to build it. Singapore might have to be the center.
Okay. Well, this is a fascinating topic. Thanks for coming by, Chandran. That was Chandran Nair, founder, CEO of Global Institute for Tomorrow. Well, we're off a quick